So a few weeks ago, 2024 Olympia was conducted. And if you guys don't know, if you've been living under a rock, the Olympia is one of the biggest bodybuilding stages of all time. It's where the top of the top people go, the guys who look absolutely phenomenal and insane. And I remember being a young kid watching Jay Cutler, Ronnie Coleman. I think that any young guy who starts going to the gym will inevitably find themselves interested in the bodybuilding scene and start to follow certain people. I think one of the biggest examples in modern history is definitely Chris Bumstead. Shout out to him for winning his sixth title now, and I think that might be in a row. And he's retiring now, but overall, bodybuilding as a lifestyle is what pulls a lot of people into the fitness world as a whole. And back in 2018, a lot of people were telling me like, hey, Austin, you should compete. And it crossed my mind for a second, but at the end of the day, I decided not to, mostly because I felt like I wasn't competitive. And I feel like bodybuilding as a quote unquote sport overall is really a battle of genetics and bone structure and frame. And as you guys know, me personally, I am an ectomorph. And without the juice, without any sort of enhancement, I really don't have that much leverage. Bodybuilding as a competitive quote unquote sport, once again, tends to cater to people who have naturally amazing physiques and for people who develop muscle fairly easily, have great muscle bellies, genetics, etc., etc. But that's not the point of this video. What I really want to discuss, and this was a conversation I was having with my girl a few weeks ago, is bodybuilding actually a sport or is it just a glorified pageant? And the reason why I thought of this as I was talking to her is because I saw somebody reference bodybuilding quite often as a sport, the sport of bodybuilding. And that got me thinking, bodybuilding has definitely gotten a lot more popular, I would say, over the past decade or so, even 20 years. I mean, Arnold himself, he made it really popular back in I believe that was the 80s, might have been the 90s. No, I think that was the 80s or 70s. Yeah. So Arnold made it super popular, but each year it gets more and more popular. And so that leads me to the question, once again, is bodybuilding a sport? Now, when I was having this conversation with my girl, I was asking her and she was like, bodybuilding is not a sport. And off the top of my head, I was kind of agreeing with her. Like, when you think of a sport, you think of like a team activity where you're competing and showing skill and physical exertion and you get points and there's a clarified winner and loser. But then I was relaying that back to bodybuilding and I was like, that's kind of the same thing, because technically the guys are on stage competing. They're showing some degree of skill through their posing and how they're showcasing their muscle, which took exertion and energy to build. But there's some gray areas and gray lines. And so not only this video, I want to discuss whether or not bodybuilding is actually a sport, but I want you guys to sort of let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Tell me what you actually think. So the first thing I had to check was the definition of a sport. And according to Google, it says an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. And we already know the team sports such as baseball, soccer, or football, basketball, cricket, all these different sports that most of us grew up playing. And so relaying that back to bodybuilding, let's look at the definition once again. An activity involving physical exertion. Here's where the gray area starts to come in play. When you're posing on a stage or competing, is that involving physical exertion? Is the person up there tired? That's up for debate, right? I think posing is a skill in itself. And obviously bodybuilding is a competition, but does that mean it's a sport? Now, when I was having this conversation, she was saying how bodybuilding is not a sport despite the skill needed. It's more so like a pageant, like a muscle pageant. And I mean, it's kind of true. You guys know the beauty pageants where there's like winners and the girls are competing against one another based on beauty. If you relate that to bodybuilding, the guys are competing towards each other based on muscle builds and whatever requirement based on their class is. So that leads me to the question, is a pageant a sport? Is competitive pageants a sport? And honestly, I don't think so, but actually let's verify this based on Google. So according to Google, it says beauty pageants are not considered a sport because of the subjectivity of the competition and the lack of universal rules and score sheets. All right. And then it says some say that pageants are more about commerce and the ideals of the sponsor. So there's a little bit of subjectivity there. But could we argue that with bodybuilding, it's hard to be subjective, or is it also pretty objective? Because beauty does have some objective sort of criteria to it, but it differs based on your race. When it comes to bodybuilding, the subjectivity there in terms of placing in classes has a lot to do with somebody's genetics. And that's why I think one reason Sebum keeps winning isn't only because his amazing frame, muscle structure, but also because of his height. And I've consistently read that a reason why a lot of people kept losing to him specifically is because they're just simply not tall enough. Despite great muscle insertions, despite the same conditioning, all things equal, they will still never place first because of the height factor. And so that leads me once again, is bodybuilding just simply a battle of genetics? And could we consider that technically a sport? In some cases, this can be hard to quantify and objectify because at the end of the day, there is a lot of subjectivity to it. And a lot of people are actually very upset with some of the placings from some other people who competed in the open class. I believe it's the Middle Eastern guy. I forgot his name. But that goes to show just how upset some people can really get based on the results of the scoring system that bodybuilding has. Now, we all know that Chris has won multiple times in a row from 2019 to 2024. And I think if he was to keep competing, he can literally keep winning every single year because nobody's competitive with him. And so the thing that differs a lot of sports from things like this we see in the bodybuilding world is that we tend to have different winners at least every 2 to 3 years. It's very rare in basketball for a team to win the NBA finals 6 years, 7 years in a row. But that's something you always see within bodybuilding. Chris isn't the only one who has done this, but Ronnie Coleman, Arnold, Jay Cutler, so many people have consistently won it back to back to back, which tells me that there must be some sort of flaw within the judging system. So maybe a way it can become more objective is to class people more based on their height. I already know they kind of do this already, but maybe even creating even more tiers, or even, hear me out, this might sound crazy, but including some sort of physical exertion part of the posing or the performance to really test somebody's athletic abilities. But then that goes into another point, and that's an argument that bodybuilders aren't necessarily athletic. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't consider bodybuilding a sport, is because bodybuilders are simply just not athletic whatsoever. Bodybuilders can lift a lot of weight. They built their physiques to a crazy amount of muscle and presentation, but these guys can't run 2 or 3 miles without stopping. I doubt it. These guys, some of them can't even do 10, 15 pull-ups in a row. That's where I personally have noticed there's going to be two sides to it. Yes, bodybuilding is a sport because it's competitive. You got to do physical exertion leading up to that point, but it's not a sport because of the subjective scoring system, and also they're not necessarily the most athletic people in the world to grace a certain sport. And also beauty pageants aren't considered a sport. Maybe we can consider it an event, but overall I want you guys to really let me know your thoughts down below. I think the only comparable thing, like remotely comparable thing, will be the CrossFit Games. And CrossFit is definitely an event too, but I think CrossFit is more of a sport just because those people are super crazy fit, have crazy athletic ability. Despite the polarizing opinions about CrossFit and their form and all the stuff, you can't deny that those people are crazy in shape and can do some almost inhumane things like swimming, running, lifting, calisthenics, all the above, and competing to be the quote unquote most fit person on earth. Like I said, it's up for debate, but I'm very curious. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'm gonna see you guys next week. Peace.